On the night of August 24th, 1975, Ann Sturts went to a local bar, the TikTok Club on Utah Street in downtown Baltimore, to relax and socialize. Investigators later learned that at that bar, she crossed paths with a man who would soon end her life. According to evidence revealed in 2025, this man, 29-year-old Charles William Davis Jr., lured Ann away from the safety of the public venue under false pretenses. The two drove to a secluded area in Howard County, and there, what had began as a chance meeting turned violent. Davis and Ann got into a heated argument, which escalated into a physical confrontation. In the struggle that followed, Davis strangled Ann, ending her life in an act of brutal violence. Unaware of these details at the time, Ann's family and friends only knew that she had suddenly vanished. Her disappearance prompted a massive search and police investigation, though no meaningful clues turned up in the first few months. That December, nearly 4 months after she went missing, a heartbreaking discovery was made. Ann's remains were found on December 15, 1975, in a wooded area near what is now the Oakland Ridge Industrial Park in Columbia. Unfortunately, due to the state of her body, she was initially registered as a Jane Doe, causing valuable initial investigative time to be lost. This location was miles away from where she'd last been seen in Baltimore, indicating she had likely been abducted and transported by her attacker. The condition of Ann's body suggested she had met with an extremely violent end. The exact details were initially scarce due to decomposition. However, authorities noted trauma on her body, consistent with foul play. It was evident that Ann had been slain and left in the woods by her attacker. Identifying the remains was the next challenge for investigators. With Ann missing for months, her body was not immediately recognizable. The Howard County Police turned to the public for help, and they released a sketch of the young woman's likeness in a local newspaper, hoping someone would recognize her. That strategy paid off. Ann's co-workers saw the sketch and helped police confirm the identity of the victim, and by late 1975, authorities knew who the young woman in the woods was. Once Ann Sturts was identified as the victim, Howard County detectives focused on finding the perpetrator. They retraced her last known steps on that August night. Investigators learned that Ann had spent her final evening at a Baltimore bar, and it was believed she left the establishment with an unknown man. This suggested that a stranger encounter at the bar was likely the starting point of the crime. Detectives interviewed witnesses who had been at the club and Ann's friends and family, searching for anyone who might have seen her leave or noted the man she was with. Early on, however, tangible clues were scarce. The crime scene where her body was found, an isolated patch of woods, yielded little physical evidence. In the 1970s, forensic science was rudimentary by today's standards, and crucial evidence like DNA samples either were not collected or had deteriorated. With few leads and no immediate suspects, the investigation struggled to make headway. For a time, police pursued any theory that might fit the limited facts. One theory was that Roseanne had been the victim of a random predator who preyed on women leaving bars at night. This notion gained weight a few years later, when law enforcement in Maryland arrested Charles William Davis Jr. for a series of violent crimes. Davis was convicted of multiple slayings committed in the late 1970s and was sent to prison for life in 1978. Some of the acts he was found guilty of bore eerie similarities to what happened to Ann. All cases involving Davis involved him attacking young women after they went out for the evening, and these parallels didn't go unnoticed. By 1981, investigators began to suspect that Ann Sturts might have been one of Davis's earlier victims. Howard County cold case detectives re-examined Ann's file and saw patterns that matched Davis's known crimes. With Davis already behind bars for life, detectives reached out to question him about Ann's unsolved slaying. In 1981, Howard County authorities made a bold move to get the truth. The state's attorney's office offered Charles Davis Jr. full immunity from prosecution if he agreed to speak about the case. This meant that anything Davis revealed about the 1975 events couldn't be used to charge him in court, a controversial decision, but one aimed at finally obtaining answers. Investigators then interviewed Davis on tape that year, hoping he would confess or provide details known only to the perp. During that interview, Davis did share some information consistent with involvement in Ann's death. However, when detectives showed him a photograph of Roseanne, reportedly a high school portrait taken years before her death, Davis hesitated. He claimed he couldn't positively identify the woman in the picture as someone he recognized, which is a highly disturbing fact in and of itself. Without a clear confession or identification, the case remained stuck. The 1981 conversation, preserved on an audio cassette, ultimately led nowhere definitive. It was an investigative dead end. No charges were brought, or could be brought on the basis of his so-called confession, and Ann's case lingered on the shelves, unresolved. As years turned into decades, the file on Roseanne Sturtz became one of Howard County's oldest cold cases. Leads dried up, memories faded, and witnesses who might have known something either moved away or passed on. The evidence available was limited to old reports, that one taped interview, and circumstantial hints. By all accounts, it appeared the perpetrator would likely never be officially identified, even if the authorities had a good idea of who did it. Yet her family never forgot her, and neither did the police, and the case was never closed, only dormant. Indeed, it would be a fresh set of eyes and dogged persistence nearly half a century later that finally cracked the mystery. In 2022, Corporal Wade Zufall of the Howard County Police Department took over reviewing the department's cold case files. When he came upon Roseanne Sturtz's case, the second oldest cold case on record for the county, he felt compelled to dig deeper. Zufall meticulously pored over every piece of evidence from 1975 that still existed, determined to find something that earlier investigators might have missed. His diligence yielded a remarkable discovery. Tucked away in the case records, Zufall found the long-forgotten 1981 letter from the state's attorney granting Charles Davis immunity in exchange for information. Alongside it was the actual audio cassette recording of detectives' interview with Davis from that year. These two pieces, the letter and the tape, were the quote-unquote lost evidence that could potentially revive the investigation. When Zufall listened to the 1981 recording, he heard Davis acknowledge knowing about Ann's case, though stopping short of a full confession. It was clear that decades ago, police had been on the right track with Davis. Now, with the benefit of modern technology, Zufall believed it might be possible to succeed where the earlier efforts fell short. Knowing that DNA analysis or new forensic testing wasn't an option, Zufall decided to use a different modern technique, a renewed personal approach and updated visuals. He began a correspondence with the now elderly Davis, who was in his late 70s and still serving multiple life sentences. Establishing a rapport over time, Zufall hoped to persuade Davis to speak openly. In late 2024, he arranged to interview Davis in person at the police department's headquarters. Zufall treated the serial offender not just as a criminal to be interrogated, but as someone whose cooperation could finally bring closure to a grieving family. This time, Zufall came prepared with a crucial piece of new evidence, a photograph of Ann Sturtz that looked the way she did when Davis encountered her. Rather than using the outdated high school photo that had failed to jog Davis's memory in 1981, Zufall showed him a different picture from when she was 20 years old. In that newer image, Ann's face was more immediately recognizable to someone who had met her in 1975. The strategy worked, and as Davis gazed at the photo of Roseanne, something clicked. Noticing a distinctive scar visible in the image, Davis realized he did know this woman. The memory of that night in 1975 resurfaced. He nodded and confirmed that the person in the photograph was indeed the young woman he had assaulted so many years ago. Faced with the visual confirmation, and reminded that he still had legal immunity for anything he revealed about this case, Davis finally confessed. After nearly 50 years, the case of Anne's slaying had its answer straight from the perpetrator's mouth. On March 11th, 2025, Howard County authorities announced that the 1975 cold case of Ann Sturts was officially solved. The state's attorney affirmed that the decades-old promise of immunity would be honored, meaning Davis will not face new charges in this case. Nevertheless, Davis remains behind bars for the 3 other convictions he is already serving, ensuring that he will spend the rest of his life in prison. Megan Rose was a 25-year-old nursing assistant living on Australia's Sunshine Coast in 1997. She shared a unit in Markula with her de facto partner, 45-year-old Keith Lees, and his young child. In the late evening of July 17, 1997, Megan left her Markula home around 8 p.m., driving off in her white Suzuki hatchback. When she did not return, concern grew rapidly. Early the next morning, July 18, 1997, her car was found abandoned in a nearby parking lot, and a tragic discovery was made at the base of the Point Cartwright Cliffs on the Sunshine Coast. Megan's body was found on the rocks below the cliff face at around 7 a.m. Police at the time saw no obvious signs of foul play and noted her high blood alcohol level. Investigators assumed that the young woman had come to end herself voluntarily and summarily shut the case down. For years, the case remained closed, with Megan being considered the author of her own fate. Yet those who knew Megan had doubts from the beginning. Her family and friends never believed she would have done such a thing, with their concerns generally being dismissed as loved ones that couldn't handle reality. However, Megan had been making plans to meet friends and was considering leaving her relationship with Keith Lees around the time of her death. The lingering suspicions eventually prompted police to take a second look. It wasn't until 2022 that a dedicated cold case unit launched a fresh review of Megan's death, uncovering new information that cast the tragedy in a very different light. Detectives learned that Megan's partner had taken out a life insurance policy in her name about a year before she died, and he received a payout of over $200,000. This startling discovery, combined with other evidence, led Queensland police to conclude that Megan Rose may not have done it herself, but they needed more evidence. In June 2023, Queensland authorities publicly announced they were treating Megan's death as a slaying and offered a $500,000 reward for information to finally crack the case. By this point, their prime suspect was Megan's former partner, Keith Lees. Detectives interviewed the 72-year-old Lees in Victoria on June 25, 2023, as part of the reinvestigation. But within days, just as the renewed public appeal and reward made headlines, Lees vanished. And I have to say, if you're trying to establish that you're innocent, this isn't a good look at all. His vehicle was found abandoned near the Cape Nelson Lighthouse at Portland in Victoria the next day. Investigators soon discovered that Lees was traveling under false identities and moving across state lines to evade detection. A nationwide manhunt ensued, spanning 18 months and multiple states and territories. Even his own family implored him to surrender, with multiple family members coming out in favor of justice for Megan. Ultimately, a critical tip from the public provided the break investigators needed. Acting on this tip, authorities finally tracked the fugitive to a property in a Sydney suburb. On January 2, 2025, police moved in and arrested 72-year-old Keith Lees ending his time on the run. After his arrest, Keith Lees was extradited to Queensland to face charges in Megan Rose's death. Prosecutors now allege that Lees attacked Megan on the night of July 17, 1997, near the lighthouse atop the Point Cartwright Cliffs. They further allege that he staged the scene to look like a tragic, though intentional, fall. In addition to the most severe charge, Lees was also hit with several charges in New South Wales related to his time as a fugitive. At present, Keith Lees remains in custody pending trial and is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and turn on all notifications. On the morning of March 21st, 1977, Honolulu police were called to McKinley High School. At 7:30 that morning, a teacher had discovered a shocking sight: the body of 16-year-old Dawn Momahara on the second floor of a building on the campus. She was found lying on her back, partially clothed, with an orange cloth tightly wrapped around her neck. An autopsy confirmed that Dawn had been strangled. Investigators determined that Dawn had last spoken to her mother the previous day after receiving a phone call from an unknown male. Dawn told her mother she was going to a nearby shopping center with friends and never returned home. Police launched an intensive investigation in 1977, interviewing students, staff, and anyone who might have seen Dawn before her death. A witness reported seeing Dawn on the campus the night before, getting into a car near the school's English building. The car was described as a distinctive 1974 or 1975 Pontiac Le Mans with a maroon body and white vinyl top, which had been spotted parked on the grass near the building. The witness and his girlfriend noticed a man with the vehicle. When they circled back for a closer look, both the car and the man were gone. Investigators released composite sketches of a person of interest and the possible vehicle based on these descriptions. Within a week of the slaying, police questioned two brothers, William and Gideon Castro, who were former McKinley students, known to have interacted with Dawn. William Castro admitted he'd last seen Dawn just 3 days before her slaying when she passed by his house. He offered her a ride to school, which she declined. Gideon, who had graduated from McKinley in 1976, stated he knew Dawn from a dance and recalled last seeing her in February 1977. Despite these interviews, at the time there was no direct evidence linking the Castro brothers, or anyone else, to the crime. Police had the sketches and some physical evidence from the scene, but 1970s forensic technology was limited. No suspect was conclusively identified in 1977, and Dawn's case began to stall out. As months turned into years, the investigation into Dawn Momahara's slaying went cold. It was only with advancements in forensic science that Dawn's case saw new hope. In 2019, 42 years after the slaying, Honolulu cold case detectives revisited the evidence from 1977. Several pieces of Dawn's clothing retained from the crime scene were submitted for modern DNA analysis. By May 2020, a crime lab was able to develop a partial DNA profile of an unknown male from material on Dawn's clothing. Detectives then turned to genealogical DNA techniques to find potential matches, though since the technology was very new at the time, progress was slow. In 2023, the DNA evidence yielded a crucial lead. Analysts identified two possible suspects who were biologically compatible with the crime scene DNA. These were the same Castro brothers who had been interviewed back in 1977. Investigators proceeded methodically to confirm which of the brothers actually matched the DNA. In November 2023, Honolulu police traveled to Chicago, where William Castro was living, and surreptitiously obtained a DNA sample from one of William's adult children. Importantly, Testing confirmed that William didn't directly match the DNA from the crime scene, effectively ruling him out. Attention then turned fully to Gideon Castro. Evidence showed that Gideon's biological son's DNA was consistent with being the child of whoever left the DNA on Dawn's clothing. Absolute confirmation was obtained when Gideon's DNA was directly proven to be a direct match soon afterwards. In January 2025, armed with the DNA evidence, Honolulu authorities issued a warrant for Gideon Castro's arrest on a charge of second-degree slaying. Castro was located in Mill Creek, Utah, just outside Salt Lake City, where he had been living in a nursing home in poor health. On January 23, 2025, police in Utah, working with Honolulu detectives, arrested Gideon Castro at the nursing facility, nearly 48 years after Dawn's life was brutally taken. He was held on a fugitive warrant from Hawaii, with bail set at $250,000 as he awaited extradition. At a court hearing in Salt Lake City the following month, Gideon Castro appeared via video from a hospital bed and waived his right to challenge extradition, agreeing to be sent back to Hawaii. Notably, his defense attorney stated that despite not fighting extradition, Gideon intends to plead not guilty to the charges. This case shows the overwhelming investigative power of forensic genealogy techniques. Without this technological breakthrough, there would have been no way for the authorities to ever get justice for Dawn and her family. While this justice has sadly taken almost half a century, it's better late than never. That said, there's still a lot of unknowns about Dawn's case, and I hope to have an update as to why this act occurred in an upcoming episode.